Good day, everyone. We are the Group 7 composed of Mr. Baleros, uh, Miss Cuevas, Miss Gadacho, Mr. Pabustan, and yours truly, Mr. Wilfred John Malana. And today we will be discussing biodiversity then and now and the different environmental accidents on water. And to start off our discussion will be Mr. Pabustan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Wilfred. So, the first topic that we're going to talk about is biodiversity extinction. Uh, Diversity of all living forms on Earth is known as biodiversity. Humans depend on animals and plants for everything they need to thrive, including clean water, food, and medications. Plants are essential for purifying air, reducing reducing temperature increases, and offering protection against climate change. However, species are disappearing between 100 and 1,000 times more faster than expected, and 28% of the more than 142,000 species studied are deemed endangered. 40% of the amphibians category that includes frogs and toads are in danger. So, in other words, this is just a sort of summarize of what biodiversity extinction is. So, in other words, biodiversity is essential. 99% of all species that have ever existed are now gone, and it is typical for species to develop and go extinct over time. But today, species are disappearing between 100 and 1,000, more than expected, according to biologists. A red list of endangered species have been maintained by the International Union of Conservation of Nature since 1964. 28% of the more than 142,000 species studied are deemed endangered, meaning they face a very high risk of going extinct. Now, for the next topic, I'm going to be talking about water pollution. What is water pollution? Well, water pollution is the polluting of bodies of water. Water pollution occurs when rivers, lakes, seas, groundwater, and aquifers become contaminated with industrial and agricultural effluents. When water becomes contaminated, it has a negative impact on all life forms that rely on it, whether directly or indirectly. These consequences of water pollution might be felt for many years. The discharge of pollutants into water bodies that render the water unfit for human use and direct aquatic ecosystem is referred to as water pollution. Numerous diverse pollutants such as petroleum, hazardous waste, and disease-causing bacteria can lead to water pollution. Another cause of water pollution that has terrible effect on the ecosystem in the area are oil spills. Either point source or distributed source contribute to water pollution. A pipe or canal, as those used for discharge from industrial facilities, or a city drainage system is referred to as a point source. Because the polluted water has been gathered and transported to a single location where it can be cleaned, point sources of water pollution are simpler to manage than distributed sources. Now, here's some examples of water pollution. We have microplastic pollution, we have emerging contaminants, and last we have eutrophication. Microplastic, Microplastics have been discovered in a wide range of settings, including marine and freshwater ecosystems. In the early 21st century, Annual plastic pollution from all sorts of plastic was projected to be 4 million to 14 million tons in the seas alone. Microplastics, which are found in dust and airborne fiber particles, are also a source of air pollution. The health consequences of inhaling microplastics remain unclear. Emerging contaminants, also known as contaminants of emerging concern, can relate to a wide range of chemicals, including pharmaceutical, personal care or home cleaning goods, lawn care, and agricultural products, among others. These pollutants end up in our country's lakes, rivers, where they harm fish and other aquatic creatures. It has also been demonstrated that these contaminants bioaccumulate up the food chain, placing non-aquatic animals at danger when they consume polluted fish. The USGS monitors and evaluates these harmful compounds from their point of origin all the way through the food chain. And lastly, we have eutrophication. Eutrophication causes a chain reaction in the environment, beginning with an excess of algae and plants. Excess algae and plant materials break down and emit enormous volumes of carbon dioxide. This causes ocean acidification by lowering the pH of seawater. Acidification inhibits fish and shellfish development and can hinder bivalve mollusk shell production. As a result, commercial and recreational fishery capture less, resulting in smaller harvest and more costly seafood.
Okay, now we will be discussing about the environmental accidents on water. First off, I will be talking about the Minamata disease. So, the Minamata Bay disaster in Japan was a severe case of industrial pollution that occurred in the 1950s by the release of large amounts of industrial wastewater containing high levels of methyl mercury into the bay by the chemical factory owned by Chiso Corporation. So methyl mercury is a highly toxic and bioaccumulative form of mercury that can easily enter the food chain when it is released into the environment. And if consumed, symptoms include numbness in the limbs, difficulty in walking, loss of vision and hearing, and can progress to more severe symptoms such as convulsions, coma, and even death. The factory continued to release the toxic waste into the bay until the 1968, when, after years of protests and lawsuits, the Chiso Corporation finally accepted responsibility for the disease and compensated the affected families. The disaster led to the creation of stricter environmental regulations in Japan and around the world, and is considered still one of the worst cases of industrial pollution in history. And Minamata disease is a significant public health concern still in Japan and other countries where industrial pollution has occurred. The Japanese government has set up the Minamata Disease Certification Center to certify and provide medical treatment to patients and their families. The center also conducts research to improve the understanding and treatment of the disease. The legacy of Minamata disease serves as a reminder of the devastating effects of industrial pollution and the importance of strict regulations and monitoring to prevent such incidents from happening again in the future. Also, efforts to prevent further contamination and spread of the disease include: number one, strict regulation on industrial waste disposal and monitoring on mercury levels in food products. Number two is medical treatment and compensation for the affected individuals and families. And Thirdly is increasing public knowledge or awareness about the dangers of mercury poisoning and the importance of environmental protection. The next part of the report will be discussed by Mr. Paleros. Thank you.
Okay, for Silent Spring. Silent Spring. Silent Spring is a book written by Rachel Carson 1962 that exposed the harmful environmental effects of the indiscriminate use of pesticides, particularly dichlorothienil trichloroethane DDT or DDT. The book exposed how pesticides like DDT were polluting water bodies and killing fish, other aquatic life, birds, and other animals that depended on them for food. Furthermore, it is also highlighted how these pesticides were also affected human health and how their persistence in environment was causing long-term damage. The book publication sparked widespread public concern and led to a nation ban on DDT and other harmful pesticide in United States. The book's publication led to a nationwide ban on DDT and other harmful pesticides, and it helped raise awareness of the importance of protecting the government, especially water resources, from pollution. It also led to the creation of Environment Protection Agency or EPA and the passage of important environmental legislation such as the Clean Water Act, which helped the regulate and control pollution of nations' water bodies. The book brought attention to the interconnectedness of all forms of life and the importance of preserving biodiversity, including aquatic life and its habitats. Next, the next slide.
So, I am Sophia Kagadacha and I will be discussing about the canal or canal. Love Canal is one of the most appalling environmental tragedies in American history. Love Canal was meant to be a dreamed community until it became a nightmare and became the example of groundwater pollution in the United States. And it is a Niagara Falls neighborhood named after a large ditch dug for hydroelectric power in the 1890s. So the ditch was abandoned before it generated any power and sat mostly dormant for decades except for swimming by locals. So around year 1920s, Niagara Falls began dumping urban waste into Love Canal, and in 1940, the waste from the World War II was dumped there, including the waste from the frantic effort to build a nuclear bomb. In 1953, the Hooker Chemical Company, then the owners and operators of the property, covered the canal with earth and sold it to the city for $1. So the chemical waste was eventually wormed its way into people's basements and metal barrels rose to the surface. So the trees and gardens began to die, as did bicycle tires and the rubber soles of children's shoes, which integrated in puddles. So residents repeatedly complained about this kasi may strange odors and substances that appeared in their yards from the 1950s to the late 1970s. So at last, President Carter declared the Love Canal a state of emergency in 1978, so making it the first human-caused environmental problem to be designated as such. On the first day of August 1978, the lead paragraph of a front page story on New York Times was Niagara Falls, 25 years after the Hooker Chemical Company stopped using the Love Canal here as an here as an industrial dump with 82 different compounds, 11 of them suspected carcino- carcinogens and have been percolating upward through the soil. Their drum containers rotting and leaching their contents into backyard and basements of 100 homes and a public school built on the banks of the canal. And just a few months after the article, the Love Canal exploded. The explosion was triggered by a record amount of rainfall shortly thereafter the leaching began. So the incident in Love Canal became a symbol stored chemical waste. So Love Canal Cleanup, which was funded by Superfund and completed in 2004, included the removal of contaminated soil, the installation of drainage pipes to capture the contaminated groundwater for treatment, and the covering of the canal with clay and plastic. This tragedy has analyzed tens of thousands hazardous waste in sites in the United States. Nonetheless, over 1,000 major hazardous waste sites that pose a significant risk to human health or environment are still being cleaned up. So the next topic will be about the Great Stink of 1858 and will be reported or discussed by Ms. Cuevas.
So, so for the Great Stink of 1858, um, the Great Stink of 1858 started with the Thames River, the longest river in southern England. So this river had been unceremoniously dumped with wastewater from manufacturing industries, from slaughterhouses, and tons from domestic buildings. So including in the dumping are the human feces and animal carcasses. So, in short, the river was treated as a large litter basket because of the people's belief that since the river is connected to the sea, their wastes will be easily swept to it. However, what they didn't know was that the Thames River is a tidal river, meaning the tides from the sea uncontrollably pushes the wastewater away instead of pulling it, leaving the wastewater nowhere to go. So it became stagnant. The Thames River. So thus the Thames River only collected and stored wastes. So the sad fact about this environmental problem is that this unceremonial dumping of waste started back in the 17th century and only became a public concern in the 19th century, meaning the river has been accumulating waste for more or less than 200 years. So their concerns only started to build up when thousands of London citizens connected their ill-constructed cesspits to several surface drains, creating a system in which tons of wastewater was being washed through the streets and directly to the city's main source of clean water. So, because of this, London experienced several cholera outbreaks, particularly in years 1832, 1849, and 1854. So, killing thousands per week. So, and people that time didn't know the nature of cholera disease. And so they assumed that it was from the river's bad stench. Not until Dr. John Snow researched about the water from one of London's drinking wells and found out that it had somehow integrated with the city's cesspits, and later discovered that these contaminated waters are the breeding grounds of cholera bacteria. Therefore, upon learning this well was closed for the public and the outbreak almost vanished overnight. So far, the cholera problem was almost solved, but somehow the stench was still left unaddressed. Not until the hottest summer of 1858 happened. So the hot weather of 1858 was so unnatural that the water level of the Thames River dropped significantly, exposing the centuries worth of rotted garbage. So there are tons of human feces, animal carcasses on the river banks or the river bank of the Thames River. And this had made the stench even more intolerable. So also intolerable for London's parliament, whose quarters are near the riverside. So this summer of 1858 brought the local parliament into passing a bill authorizing £3 million that is said to refurbish the entirety of the Thames River. So Basil Gett, a civil engineer, was entrusted for its reconstruction. And after 20 years of reconstruction, the new sewage um, for the river, Basil Gett was knighted in 1875 for saving not only the river but also the people from another disease or from cholera. So the Great Stink is nature's lesson for people's century-long ignorance. It is an eye-opener for people that, albeit not seen, there will always be damage for every malpractice we do, especially from what they have experienced the dumping of waste to the bodies of water. So thus the horrifying effects we currently can see are born out of years and years of built up pollution. So it is better to stop earlier, even when the damage is not seen nor felt. As said by Mr. Pabustan a while ago, consequences of pollution might only be felt after many years.
That's the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.